Weapons is the best movie you'll see this year. It's about trauma and how people deal differently with traumatic events. Writer-director Zach Cregger knows trauma all too well. Hey, I'm Mike. I studied film, I work in TV, and I love movies. For this review, I'm going to assume you've seen Weapons and walked out going, I can't wait to hear what Mike has to say about this. And I do have a lot to say, so strap in. Weapons is the sophomore film from writer-director Zach Cregger. Cregger is best known as a founding member of The Whitest Kids You Know. His first film was the suspense horror film Barbarian, and Weapons follows in that genre. The premise of Weapons is, early one morning, 17 of the 18 students in this particular elementary school class get out of their beds and disappear into the night. It stars Julie Gardner, better known for her role as Ruth in Ozark, as the teacher whose kids go missing and the first person the small town points the finger at. Josh Brolin as a concerned father of one of the missing kids, and Amy Madigan with an absolutely astounding, career-defining performance as Aunt Gladys. Fun fact, Amy Madigan has been married to Ed Harris since 1983. We love her for her roles in Field of Dreams and Uncle Buck, but mark my words, after an illustrious and award-winning career, this will be the role she's most remembered for. From the very beginning of the film to the very last frame, I was spellbound. That's because the story unfolds in a non-traditional way. The film starts and we don't get a good look at any of our characters. They're all shot from behind and we're waiting for a close-up or an ID shot that never comes. And then we get a title card with a character's name. The film is told via character vignettes, where we see the events of the story play out from each character's perspective. We don't get a good look at the characters in the beginning because it isn't their story yet. These storylines intersect with other characters and we learn more and more about what's going on through these characters' perspectives. At one point, I was asking myself who was going to be the one who pieces all this together. We learn a little of the plot through one character, then a little more through another, and it's never really clear who's going to be the hero. But I was looking for a traditional storyline in a non-traditional story. We, the audience, are picking up clues from each of the characters and we are the ones who have to figure out what's going on. This is interesting for a couple reasons. First, Cregger didn't have to deal with exposition. Most Hollywood films are told through a central character. We learn with the character and come to the same conclusions as they do. Most detective stories are told this way, like Chinatown and even Indiana Jones. The protagonist is searching for answers and we watch as they piece the caper together and then explain that to us. But why do all that? Audiences are smart. They don't need to be spoon-fed a plot to follow along. The characters and Weapons aren't crackpot detectives. They're a teacher, a principal, a contractor. In fact, even the cop says, I'm not a detective in case you didn't know. He's telling us he doesn't have what it takes to solve the case. None of them do. And solving the case is less important than stopping the bad guy. It's also great because we get so much more character development that would have been afforded in a traditional story. Typically, when a main character meets a secondary character, we only get one side of that character, the side the protagonist sees. But giving each character their own vignette, we get a much clearer picture of their backgrounds and motivations and where they're coming from. I'm thinking specifically of the principal and his husband and the drug addict and his adventures. It's very clever, but there's one more reason why telling a story this way is pretty genius. Cregger has said that Weapons is about trauma and how people deal with trauma. In August of 2021, Zach Cregger lost his good friend and fellow Whitest Kids You Know co-star Trevor Moore. Moore fell from his balcony and died on impact. Toxicology reports said that alcohol was involved. If you know anything about trauma, you may have heard about the 5 F's of trauma response. I joked that I could have had a psychology minor in college had I postponed graduation and took a few more classes. Instead, I have an almost minor in psychology. According to my almost minor in psychology, the 5 F's of trauma response are fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flop. While no two trauma responses are identical, people deal with traumatic situations differently, but these are the recognized ways in which people typically respond to trauma. Clearly, Cregger was affected by his friend's passing, and he has channeled that grief, that trauma, into Weapons by personifying each of the traumatic responses as a character. And that's likely the final and most clever reason the movie is told in the way it is. Each character, or each trauma response, is given its own vignette. Check it out. Archer, played by Josh Brolin, represents the fight instinct. He is unwavering in his pursuit to find his son. Nothing will stand in his way. Someone who is in fight mode will hyper-fixate on the trauma. Archer is sleeping in his son's bed and watching the last video recorded of him running away over and over again. Justine, Julia Gardner, is flight. Flight isn't simply running away from trauma, it's described as panic, worry, rumination. People in flight mode often sink themselves into work or other distractions to take their mind off of the trauma. Justine specifically asks to remain at work, but the school she works for sends her home nonetheless. Paul, the cop, is, in my estimation, freeze. A freeze response is characterized by disassociation, anger, numbness, being stuck in a situation and helpless to change that situation. Paul is stuck in his relationship and in his job. He has a short fuse, as we see with the drug addict kid. He has shut down and is just phoning it in. I'm talking specifically about the scene in the car with Justine when she mocks him and the precinct for being blasé about finding the kids. Alex, the only child in the class that didn't disappear, represents Fawn. He's held captive by his Aunt Gladys and charged with taking care of his parents and the other trapped kids. Fawning is people-pleasing, codependency, identity confusion. Dealing with trauma in this fashion often leads to Stockholm Syndrome. And the fifth trauma response is flop. Flop is surrendering for safety, going limp, loss of physical control. Everyone that Aunt Gladys brings under her spell represents flop. Thematically, Weapons is firing on all cylinders. It's amazing to watch all this play out. But what makes Weapons really shine is what Krieger is doing with the camera. There are shots where the camera is attached to a car door and slammed shut, or canted as we run with one of the characters down the street. The framings are beautiful and interesting. As I mentioned earlier, in the first 10 minutes or so of the film, we're only given the backs of characters' heads. All of it's used to great effect, and they kept this film nerd very, very happy. And the final scene is, dare I say, funny? Leave it to Zach Krieger to mix in a taste of comedy in this suspense horror film. I typically don't give movies ratings on this channel, nor do I do thumbs up or thumbs down. My feelings on films are more nuanced than a graded scale. I read somewhere that Francis Ford Coppola never gave anything 0 stars. If you took the time to make a movie and put it out, you get a star. But he also never gave 5 stars, or the highest you could give, because perfection to him was unattainable. You could always make something better. I kind of go by that rating system. But there are a handful of films that I would call perfect. And for me, it's Children of Men, The Wizard of Oz, and, dare I say, Weapons? The script, the cinematography, the acting, all on point. But the real judge of a film for me is, will the film stay with me after the credits? Oh yeah. Weapons is one of the best films I've seen this year, and it might be, in my mind, a perfect 5-star film. As always, I'd love to read your thoughts on Weapons in the comments below. Film is about community. I'm Mike, and I love movies.